Time for us to take a look at what's going on in tech. And I think I could start it by saying I think the price might be the first thing that's going on in tech. Carmi Levy is CTV's tech analyst. He is on the line. So, Carmi, I guess for as much as we know, but of course the news seems to change virtually every day now, prices, fair to say, are going to be going up. I heard someone, first of all, talk about a Sony PlayStation saying today the prices, if things stay the way they are, could actually double.
Yep, because they are subject to tariffs, or they will be subject to tariffs as they're brought into the U.S. once this regime takes effect. Again, there's whiplash news, so it could change by the hour, but generally speaking, once these tariffs take effect, that's what's going to happen. And of course, in Canada, when you buy a PS5 or an Xbox or any other electronic device, video game console, smartphone, laptop, whatever, it's usually provisioned from an American tech company in one of their warehouses in the U.S., so it has to be brought over the border, and at that point it would be subject to a tariff as well. So, with tariffs and counter tariffs flying all over the place, and the fact that we don't make anything here in Canada, we import pretty much all electronics that we use. We are particularly vulnerable to that, and so we're not seeing official announcements from a lot of companies. Acer, for example, has announced a price hike in the U.S. for its laptops. That will inevitably trickle over to Canada. We know that Nintendo, they are putting on hold pre-orders for the Switch 2 in both the U.S. and Canada because they're just not sure what the pricing should be given all the changing kind of rules every day. But we are seeing the industry start to respond bit by bit, and each company almost every day has another announcement. And the bottom line for all of us is, as time goes on, we will see upward pressure on some devices. And some analysts are looking at, for example, things like iPhones and saying they could be 20 to 30% more expensive later this year, or even worse, some analysts, the real pessimistic ones, are saying between double and triple the price if things are worst case scenario. So I don't think it'll get to that point, but the long and the short of it is, if you're thinking of buying a device, you might want to think sooner if that's your timeline. Don't buy it if you weren't otherwise planning it. But if you're already in the market and you're going to be buying over the next few months, you might want to buy it sooner to have a greater chance of avoiding it. Or if you have a smartphone, you were maybe thinking about it, you were on the fence, and you don't want to buy a new one now, start thinking about how you're going to stretch its lifespan a little bit. Keep the battery going longer, keep the software updated, all that, so that you don't have to buy it now. You can wait until all of this craziness is over, and then you can buy a phone later on when, hopefully all of this trade war nonsense is in the rear view.
So let me ask the dumb question of the day. Since we're getting these products, let's pick any of them, a laptop, from U.S. companies, right, that are headquartered there, but they come from Japan or wherever, China, wherever, if they were to be shipped directly here, like let's say for the case of Acer, I don't know where Acer makes their computers, but let's say it's China, and instead of going through the U.S., just ship them directly from China, is that a way to avoid tariffs?
That's certainly a possibility, and I would expect tech companies would be looking at their global supply chains and asking themselves, how do we avoid these? How do we sort of go directly from our manufacturing sites overseas directly to countries outside the U.S. without having to incur U.S. tariffs? So yes, that is a potential answer, but making that happen, it's a pretty complex undertaking. Global supply chains are really complex. They take years to set up. And Canada isn't that really big of a global economy. So
Right.
a lot of these tech companies, it may not be worth their while, given how many laptops we buy, not many, it might not be worth their while to do that. And so as much as I hope that happens, I just don't see most global tech companies pivoting like that to service Canada's relatively small population. Maybe that'll happen if this gets dragged out, but so far, because everyone's hoping that this ultimately reverses, that this is something else, that they're not we're not seeing the ships come here directly from China, and we probably won't anytime soon, which means we're still really vulnerable to whatever happens in the U.S.
Okay, let me move on from that and talk about, no section is complete these days without talking about AI. You have a note here saying the difference between how humans and AI think. What's this about?
So this is research that comes to us out of both Amsterdam and the U.S., and basically what they looked for was to try to understand sort of why AI models make certain decisions. And one of the problems has been is they're kind of like black boxes. Like, for example, when an artificial intelligence model goes off the rails and it starts lying or hallucinating or going rogue, even the people who designed it can't explain what's going on inside. It's almost like they can't scan the brain. And so what they did was they tried to kind of understand at what point does it go off the rails? What does the brain, or the electronic brain in this case, of a large language model look like before it goes off the rails? And so they actually scanned it as it sort of went through that process, and they created the first virtual brain scan of a large language model. And they're learning from this how to better train models so they're less likely to either get things wrong in the first place or try to make up stuff when, wrong stuff when they do. So it's bit by bit, they're just starting to learn, but it's really the first published research that we've seen that digs into the black box of large language models and tries to explain why do they mess up the way they do, and how can we fix it?
It's funny. So I started using Perplexity a while ago, right? Beyond ChatGPT. Someone said, try this. And what I notice now that's different from it was at the beginning, where you used to get instant answers, I'm seeing Perplexity now actually stop to think.
Yeah, and that's part of it is that they continue to add compute capability, and we've talked about this previously, where whenever you ask a chatbot something, it's generating a lot of activity back at a data center somewhere. It requires a lot of computing power, and so as the models get better, as the technology improves, they're adding more computers to their data centers, more computing power, and in some cases that means that it's going to spend more time to dig deeper into larger data sets to give you a more precise answer. It might mean it's a little bit slower, but at least the answer won't be, sort of this sort of crazy answer that you're like, well, I'm going to ask another one. It'll give you the correct answer first time out.
Okay, and then finally, let me go to this, because we mentioned AI. You mentioned H&M, the clothing store, has started rolling out, I didn't even know this was a thing, AI clones for modeling, which is, of course, making photographers a little bit concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking as I'm a photographer in my spare time, so this kind of worries me. Basically, what they've done is they've taken 30 of their top models, and they've taken a bunch of imagery of them, and they've used that imagery, so photos, videos, things like that. They threw it into an AI model, and then they created what's called an AI twin of them, which allows them to then create new imagery based on that AI twin. So they won't need to have the models show up at a photo shoot anymore. They'll just create the result that they want digitally, which, sounds great if you're H&M, because now it saves you money. You don't have to pay the model every time they come for a shoot. They say that they'll be getting paid for the rights to use their material. So in other words, every time they create something out of that digital twin, they'll still get paid. But they don't say anything about the photographers, the hair stylists, the makeup artists, all the other creatives who are involved in a shoot, who are part of the mechanics of the fashion industry. What happens to them? Company won't say. And again, it all also begs the question: how good is that imagery? Is it close enough to reality that we won't be able to tell the difference? We're not quite there yet. And then, of course, there's every time you sort of think about a model that you follow, somebody discovered that model. Someone was walking through a market and saw them. Well, eventually, if there are no models and they're all digitally created, how are we going to discover the next generation? We're kind of losing our humanity in this. It's becoming more efficient for companies like H&M, but I think everyone else pays a pretty significant price.
The future, it's a scary place. Carmi Levy, CTV tech analyst. Thank you, Carmi.